Look at a map of the world today. The borders, the languages spoken, the trade routes, and even the legal systems of nearly every country on Earth were shaped by one massive historical force: colonialism. For centuries, European powers, and later others, expanded their reach, dominating distinct cultures and extracting resources from the Americas to Asia, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Today, this topic is a battlefield. On one side, you have arguments that colonialism was a brutal engine of exploitation, genocide, and cultural erasure. On the other, some argue it was the necessary, albeit painful, vehicle for modernization, spreading technology, medicine, and democracy to the world. So, who is right? Was colonialism a net positive that dragged the world into the modern era? Or was it a catastrophic crime that we are still paying for today? To answer this, we have to look past the anger and the nostalgia. We have to look at the balance sheet of history. Welcome to the deep dive.
First, we need to be specific. When people ask this question, they are usually referring to the era of Western European expansion, roughly from the 15th to the mid-20th century. It's important to admit that colonialism wasn't one single thing. The British rule in Canada was very different from the Belgian rule in the Congo. The Spanish in Mexico operated differently than the French in Vietnam. However, they all shared a core mechanic: extraction and control. The colony existed primarily to benefit the colonizer. But did the unintended byproducts of that control benefit the colonized? Let's look at the strongest arguments for the good.
The most common argument in favor of colonialism is infrastructure. The British built one of the largest railway networks in the world in India. They built ports in Singapore and Hong Kong that turned sleepy fishing villages into global economic powerhouses. Proponents argue that colonialism brought the toolkit of modernity. This included modern medicine, the introduction of quinine to fight malaria, smallpox vaccines, and modern sanitation standards, which eventually lowered mortality rates. Education and language. Colonialism established schools and European languages like English, French, Spanish, which paradoxically gave disparate tribes and regions a lingua franca to communicate and trade with the world, bringing down language barriers. Legal systems. Many post-colonial nations still use the legal frameworks left behind, common law or civil code, which provided a structure for property rights and bureaucracy. There is also the moral argument regarding the suppression of specific local practices deemed inhumane, such as the suppression of sati in India or the ending of the Arab slave trade in East Africa by the Royal Navy in the 19th century. The argument here is simple. Colonialism, despite its violence, fast-tracked the developing world into the global economy. Without it, proponents say, these regions might have remained isolated and technologically behind for centuries longer. But there is a massive but. If the good argument relies on infrastructure, the bad argument relies on intent and cost. Take those railways in India. They weren't built to help Indians visit their grandmothers. They were built to move troops to quell rebellions and to move grain out of the interior for export, often while locals starved. Critics argue that the modernization was purely accidental. The primary function was economic drain. Deindustrialization. Before the British, India was a textile superpower. The British actively dismantled this industry to ensure India would only export raw cotton and buy back finished British cloth. Famine. Policies that prioritized cash crops like indigo or opium contributed to horrific famines, such as the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, which killed millions. Then there is the political legacy. Look at the borders of the Middle East or Africa. They are straight lines.
Why? Because European men in drawing rooms in Berlin and Paris drew them with rulers, ignoring ethnic and religious realities. This is the divide and rule strategy. Colonizers often pitted one ethnic group against another, like the Pashtuns and Sikhs in South Asia, to maintain control. When the colonizers left, these tensions exploded into civil wars and genocides that continue to destabilize these regions today. And finally, the psychological toll, the erasure of culture, the shaming of local religions, and the psychological impact of being treated as second-class citizens in one's own land. So how do we weigh these scales? Can you trade a railway for a famine? Can you trade a common language for a lost culture? This brings us to the counterfactual problem. We often compare the colonial reality to a fantasy. Fantasy A, without colonialism, Africa and Asia would be a Wakanda-like utopia of peace and advanced technology. Fantasy B, without colonialism, these regions would be stuck in the Stone Age forever. Historians suggest the reality is somewhere in the middle. Countries like Japan and South Korea were never colonized, yet they modernized, built railways, and adopted Western technology on their own terms. This suggests that modernization was possible without the humiliation of submission. Japan and South Korea prove you didn't need to be conquered to get trains. You just needed trade. Colonialism wasn't a service provided to the world, it was a business model. The modernization was the overhead cost of doing business, not the product.
Was colonialism good or bad? It was transformative. That is the only neutral word that fits. It connected the world, but it did so through chains. It built the global economy, but on a foundation of inequality. To say it was good is to ignore the millions who died and the cultures that were crushed. To say it brought nothing of value is to deny the reality of the modern world we live in today. Perhaps the best way to view it is not as a moral judgment of the past, which we cannot change, but as an explanation of the present. The wealth of Europe and the instability of the global South are not accidents. They are the twin heirs of the same history. What do you think? Is it possible to separate the development from the exploitation? Comment your thoughts on this video in the comments below.